Hi everybody, hope you're doing well. Today is Wednesday, the 25th day of March 2020. It is multiple day whatever of our lockdown. I won't call it self-quarantine because we're not really doing that. We're not doing self-isolate necessarily. We're doing more social distancing. Self-isolating, I've come to learn over the course of this pandemic and watching the news, is where people are not quite quarantined, but they're staying inside and they don't even go out for groceries or errands or anything like that. Everything has to be brought to them. So we're not living that kind of lifestyle. We're social distancing. So we basically live in the house probably 23 hours a day and go out for about an hour-long walk on days that the weather's favorable, which we did today. Had a nice long walk today, and it was really nice, about 3.5 kilometers, which is not quite as long as the walk we did on Monday, but still not too bad. It's a beautiful day outside. The sun is shining, the wind is light. We have some heavier weather coming later in the week, but today at least, it's beautiful. Saw some people around walking their dogs, going for walks themselves, kept our distance, said hi, greetings. Everyone's seems to be in a fine mood, so it's all good. It's all good. We're getting through this slowly but surely. There's been some developments in the news. The province of New Brunswick now has finally come on board with putting posts at the borders with the other provinces to try to make sure people coming into New Brunswick understand their responsibilities when it comes to isolation and all of that. So now New Brunswick is doing what PEI has been doing for several days and what Nova Scotia has been doing for a few days. So now at every interprovincial boundary in Atlantic Canada, including the boundary between New Brunswick and Quebec, if you come in by car, you will be stopped and given information and asked to confirm that you understand your responsibilities to isolate. So we'll see how that goes. PEI has been having a station at our end of the bridge for quite some time now, several days. So now every border, PEI to Quebec, we have a border with Quebec actually in Surrey, which is where a ferry goes to the Ile de la Madeleine. And we have a border with New Brunswick on the bridge, of course. In the spring, usually around the month of May, we have a ferry that will start up and go back and forth to Caribou, Nova Scotia. So we will eventually have a sea crossing ferry going to Nova Scotia as well. We'll have a border with them. Hopefully by the time the ferry gets going, none of this will be necessary. New Brunswick's already had a border stopping service that goes with the international boundary, of course, between New Brunswick and Maine. So that's always been happening for the last week and a half or so, since they shut down, for all intents and purposes, the Canada-US border. We're doing fine here. Hope you're doing fine where you are. Things are getting a little interesting in some parts of the world. The numbers keep going up. The United States numbers are going up very concerningly high and at a very steep angle. And it looks like New York State has more than half now of the total cases in the U.S. And when you think of New York City so tightly packed, it's almost impossible to not have lots of community spread going on there. So we hope they make out okay in New York. PEI's numbers are great still so far, still holding at 3. So the last several days we've had only 3 cases, no community spread yet. All 3 cases related to travel. All 3 cases are afflicting people who are able to manage their symptoms while staying at home. And another new thing's happened. We've set up, we as a province, the provincial health people, have set up a special reception, I won't say an ER, but it would be like that, I guess, for future victims who need medical attention and out-of-home medical attention, to try to divert them away from just regular hospital visits and contaminating the whole hospital. They've set up accessory areas where they can be dealt with in a contained way. One of the people leading that is Trevor Jane. He's an emergency doc, friend of mine, friend of many pilots and others here in PEI. He's a great guy. He's in the military reserves here. I guess it would be our version of the National Guard if you're watching from the United States. That's what you would compare it to. Trevor is he's a medic. He's an emergency doc. He's got all kinds of special certifications, and he's keen. He's really keen, and we're so lucky to have Trevor with us here on PEI. So things are looking pretty steady. We have to watch very closely. We have to make sure we're not part of the problem. We have to make sure we continue to practice the social distancing that has worked so well so far for all of us. Well, the rest of this video, I want to pick up where I left off a bit yesterday. as you may know by now, and if you go back through some of my older videos, you will see that Janice and I took a trip to the United Kingdom back in May and June of 2019, and I did fairly well at producing some videos from that trip in the months that followed our return, but then my life got busy with work and with other volunteer things I was doing, so I stopped, not intentionally, but I just never seemed to get around to it. I procrastinated. So now I'm back. There's obviously some time. I have 2 more days of vacation, today and tomorrow, and on Friday I go back to work from home, but my attention, of course, will be on work at that point. So I thought I'd try to get this video series completed, or almost completed if I can, by the end of the day tomorrow. So today we're going from Aberdeen, Scotland to Edinburgh, Scotland, on the train. And I have to say, I'm no train expert. I've been on a few trains before as a kid and as an adult once or twice. But from everything I've read and everything I've heard, this train trip ranks, by other people's assessments, among the top in the world for the view, for the beauty that you see out the window. It's unbelievable. And we were really lucky to be able to have the left-hand side of the carriage as it's moving forward towards Edinburgh. So we were on the eastern side of the train. We could look out our window at beauty, seacoasts, fantastic architecture, golf courses, everything. And you'll see that here in a minute. On the day that we went from Aberdeen to Edinburgh, it started with just regular morning routine, watching the news, and you can see here our little friend watching the news with Charlie State and Nina Warhurst on BBC Breakfast. He became quite a fan of BBC Breakfast during our trip, so I always let him watch the show in the morning before we left. Then it was off to the Aberdeen train station, which we, of course, didn't arrive at other than in a taxi on the outside of it, because our train the day before from Inverness didn't run. It was canceled, so we came by car, if you'll remember. So this was our first time to really go in and look around in the Aberdeen train station. Before we even boarded, Janice and I had breakfast at this nice little, looked like a sidewalk cafe, but it was covered over because the whole train station is it's glassed in. It's really nice. It's actually, train stations all over the UK are all unique, and they're all quite beautiful. And Aberdeen was no exception. It was quite lovely. So we had breakfast there, and then it was time to get on the train and head away on our journey. The countryside going out the left-hand side of the train on the way to Edinburgh was just spectacular. There's a bit of reflection from the window as I try to film going out, but if you can look past that to things like these windmills that you see, the beautiful clouds and sky and the blue sky. It was just a perfect day for this kind of trip. We went through some very, very picturesque areas, and this is a golf course we saw along the way. And sometimes the train track, and it's way closer to the shoreline than even the highway is. So if you're going down the highway to drive this route between Aberdeen and Edinburgh, you wouldn't see the kind of scenery that you get on the train. The train goes right along the shoreline at times. You can see people walking along the beach, just right underneath the wheels of the train practically, and it's just beautiful. Coming into Dundee, you see some large structures that are starting to appear there on the right, and these are, I think, because we didn't really have time to stop and ask questions, these are what I think are offshore oil rigs that are either being serviced or constructed here in Dundee, and then they float them out to wherever they are in the North Sea. That is the North Sea, by the way, that ocean that you see out beyond some of this scenery. So Dundee's a very industrial, very hardworking, very busy place, and they have a lot going on. There was at least 3 of these rigs that were visible from the train as we went through. And then the Dundee is on the Tay River. So after going through this industrial area of the town, we had an opportunity to cross the Tay on the Tay River Bridge. And even that is quite an engineering feat in and of itself. You can see the bridge coming up we're looking out the left-hand window, so we're eventually going to cross that bridge. Of course, from a train, when you're on a bridge, you can't see the bridge. So the only really good view of it we have is at this point. And you can see some cars going across. There's also obviously car bridges that go pretty well everywhere. But the train bridge is pretty unique, and there have been some accidents in the past where high winds have blown trains off bridges and things, although that wasn't going to happen today, and things haven't happened to that extent for quite some time. So the Tay River Bridge, very impressive. Eventually, when you get across to the bridge itself and get crossing, you can look back and you can see those rigs again being constructed. And then after you cross the Tay Bridge, you go through some countryside, and eventually there you are back out to the shore once again, looking out for miles and miles and miles. And the tide is obviously out here, as you can see. There's lots of exposed sandbars, and you see people walking by in spots. Just absolutely gorgeous. Once we got closer to Edinburgh, we went across the Firth of Forth, and you can see several bridges. We're on the Forth Bridge, which is the one that's farthest east, and we're looking out towards the North Sea at this point. But just a moment ago I had the camera turned the other way. You can see the other two bridges that cross the Forth. And now we're getting close to Edinburgh itself. Edinburgh lies in the southern stretch of land that borders the Firth of Forth. And this bridge is far more impressive from a distance than it is from when you're just sitting on it. You just see a bunch of girders going by. So it's obviously it's a big bridge, you can tell that. But when you're on the other side of it looking back at it, only then do you realize the sheer size of all of these bridges. The engineering that had to go into these, and the time that they built some of them. Some of these bridges were built decades and decades and decades ago, not just the other day. And to do that kind of construction with all of that steel over such a great distance, with what probably would have been far less fancy equipment than we would have today for such engineering projects, really just boggles the mind. But if you're going to get people to build a bridge, I guess you want it to be a bunch of Scotsmen, because I think they're going to build it well. Finally getting now onto the south side of the Firth of Forth. And now we're about to go by Murrayfield Stadium. If you're a fan of Scottish rugby, or basically Scottish field sports generally, you would have heard of Murrayfield Stadium. This thing is gigantic. From a distance it looks like just a regular old stadium, but when you get up close to it, it just, the size is just so impressive. And I forget how many people it seats inside, but it's tens of thousands of people can fit in there. So it's just ginormous. We got to Edinburgh Waverley Station, but we didn't actually stay right in the city proper. We went over to a place called New Craighall, which is a couple of train stops on a different train to the east of Edinburgh, further east even. And New Craighall was our home base for 3 nights and about 4 days. We had a lovely time there. We stayed at a Premier Inn, which is a very basic, clean, tidy, efficient motel. We were on the 2nd floor, I believe. As you can see, it's spacious. Janice, after a long day of travel, was quite happy to lounge out on the on what I call the fainting couch. I don't know what its real name might be. And then a funny moment came along after that. She managed to she saw the bathtub and how long that it looked. So just to get some perspective, she decided to lay down in the bathtub, and I took her picture. But then she got kind of embarrassed and flustered, because once she got in there, she couldn't get out. And she got laughing. We eventually, of course, got her out of the bathtub, but it was hilarious. It would have been all kinds of fun to play a prank on her at that point, maybe start water in it and start running the water, see how quickly she'd get out then, but I didn't do that. But anyway, it was funny to see her in the tub and then not able to get out of the tub. That night, once we got ourselves all unpacked, we walked to a large shopping area nearby. Janice used to work for the TJX group of companies, so she was quite interested in seeing this big TK Maxx store. We had some supper nearby, had some pizza, and I had a hot dog and fries, just something different. And eventually we turned in for the night. It was a lovely day, traveling, starting in Aberdeen, ending it in Edinburgh or New Craighall. And the next several days were just magnificent as well. riding on buses, getting tours, seeing places, Edinburgh Castle, Holyrood Place, all kinds of stuff. And those will be in the next couple of days of future videos. So hope you enjoyed that. A little bit of traveling, a little bit of getting out of your space now while you're stuck wherever it is you are. You can look around and see what it's like, or what it was like only just a few months ago, and what it will be like again in a few more months' time, I hope, as people are able to get themselves back out on the road, get traveling, and get seeing new places or revisiting places that they fell in love with on their last trip. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Bye.